Everything you thought you knew about Native American tribes is wrong. 9 little-known facts about Native American tribes. 1. Native Americans spoke over 300 unique languages. When settlers began carving out towns and borders across what we now call the United States, they stepped into a world already rich with voices, not just one or two, but hundreds. Native tribes across the continent spoke over 300 distinct languages, maybe even 500 if you count the dialects lost to time. These weren't simple codes or borrowed tongues, they were deep, complex, rooted in generations of lived experience. But that remarkable linguistic diversity didn't fit into Washington's vision of a unified nation. In 1868, President Ulysses S. Grant bluntly stated that native languages were part of the trouble and should be erased in favor of English. And with that, the long campaign to stamp out native speech picked up steam. Through the 1800s and beyond, native families were pushed from their homelands and placed on reservations. Their children were whisked off to boarding schools where speaking their own language could earn them a beating. The goal was clear: erase the old ways, and make room for the new. For decades, that silencing effort nearly succeeded. By the late 20th century, the number of fluent speakers had dropped so low that entire languages teetered on the edge of extinction. It wasn't until 1972 that tribes were officially allowed to teach their languages again. And in 1990, Congress passed the Native American Language Act, finally recognizing the importance of preserving what was nearly lost. As of 2013, at least 169 native languages still hung on in the U.S., though most are barely spoken today. Without continued effort, nearly all could vanish within a generation. Saving them isn't just about words. It's about memory, identity, and the endurance of a people who were nearly written out of the story. 2. The first Native American language newspaper launched in 1828. Long before newsstands and Sunday editions, Native American languages lived through spoken word, passed from elder to child around firelight, not printing presses. That changed in a big way in the early 1800s, thanks to a determined Cherokee man named Sequoyah. Without any formal schooling or outside guidance, Sequoyah spent over a decade crafting something unheard of, a written system for the Cherokee language. Not borrowed from English or Latin, not a translation, but a new set of characters that captured the way his people spoke. By 1821, he'd finished an 86-symbol syllabary that allowed the Cherokee to write exactly as they talked. And it caught on fast. Within just a few years, Cherokee folks, many who'd never held a pen, were reading and writing in their own tongue. It was a homegrown achievement, built from scratch, and it opened the door to something even bigger. In 1828, the Cherokee Phoenix rolled off the press in New Echota, Georgia. It was the first newspaper in the country printed in both English and a Native American language. It gave voice to Cherokee concerns, culture, and politics at a time when their world was being pushed to the margins. The Phoenix didn't just report the news, it made history, one printed word at a time. 3. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the U.S. Across the U.S., 574 native tribes are officially recognized by the federal government, a formal acknowledgement that carries real weight. Nearly half of those are in Alaska alone, with California following close behind, both in numbers and native population size. Federal recognition isn't just a label. It's a legal standing, a nation-to-nation relationship between a tribe and Washington. It comes with certain rights, resources, and the ability to self-govern. But here's the catch: many native communities don't have it. Without that status, they're often left out of federal programs and support. Some tribes have earned state-level recognition instead, 66 of them across 13 states, as of 2020. It's a step in the right direction, a sign that history hasn't forgotten them, even if the paperwork hasn't caught up. Recognition, in this context, is more than formality. It's about survival, self-determination, and being seen, not just in the past, but in the present. 4. Many of today's key crops were first farmed by Native Americans. Long before tractors and grocery stores, the original peoples of this land were shaping the future of farming, not just for themselves, but for the entire world. Native American tribes didn't just survive off the land, they mastered it, developing crops that now fill dinner tables across the globe. Corn, for example, didn't exist in the wild. It was carefully bred by indigenous hands in what's now southern Mexico and Guatemala, some 10,000 years ago. By the time settlers showed up in North America, native farmers had long been growing corn, beans, squash, and more, staples that formed a balanced, sustainable diet. Today, it's estimated that well over half of the global food supply traces back to crops first cultivated on this continent. That's not just farming, that's legacy. Quiet, powerful, and still feeding the world. 5. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is one of the world's oldest democracies. Long before the Founding Fathers put pen to parchment, a powerful system of governance was already thriving in the forests and river valleys of what's now the northeastern United States. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, known to many by the French name Iroquois, was built on a framework of mutual respect, collective decision-making, and a shared commitment to peace. Made up originally of 5 nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, the alliance was later joined by the Tuscarora in the 1700s. The Haudenosaunee trace their union back so far that many say it predates written history. Some scholars tie its founding to the 12th century, but for the Haudenosaunee, its roots are simply timeless. At the heart of this confederacy lies the Great Law of Peace, a deeply structured oral constitution that outlines everything from leadership responsibilities to the conduct of war and diplomacy. Think of it as a blueprint for coexistence, crafted not on paper, but through generations of memory and tradition. What sets this system apart isn't just its age, it's the ideas it carried. The principle that power flows from the people. The division of responsibilities among leaders. A governing structure based on consensus, not command. These weren't just noble ideals, they were lived realities. And they weren't lost on early American thinkers. Historians like Dr. Donald Grind have pointed to clear parallels between the Haudenosaunee model and the U.S. Constitution. In fact, Benjamin Franklin and others had direct contact with Iroquois leaders, and the Confederacy's emphasis on unity and balance of power likely helped shape the foundation of American government. And here's something the Constitution didn't borrow: in Haudenosaunee society, women held real political power. Clan mothers appointed male leaders, and could remove them, too. Authority wasn't just top-down or male-dominated, it was shared, deliberate, and built to last. A system like that doesn't survive for centuries by accident. It endures because it works. 6. The 1830 Indian Removal Act forced many tribes off their lands. Before the U.S. expanded westward, Native American nations lived and thrived across what we now call the United States. That changed in 1830, when President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. Legislation that gave federal backing to one of the most tragic chapters in American history. The push behind it was simple but brutal: settlers wanted land, especially in the South, where cotton was king. The fertile territories held by tribes like the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, and others became prime targets. Rather than coexist, the government chose removal. Under the weight of this law, entire communities were uprooted from their ancestral homes in Georgia, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee. They were forced to march westward, many on foot, to what the government called Indian Territory, in present-day Oklahoma. This wasn't just relocation. It was a forced migration under harsh conditions. Food ran out. Weather turned deadly. Disease spread. Thousands of native men, women, and children never made it to the end. What we now remember as the Trail of Tears wasn't just a tragic moment, it was a calculated policy with deadly consequences. 7. Native Americans gained U.S. citizenship in 1924. It wasn't until 1924 that Native Americans were officially recognized as citizens of the United States, nearly 150 years after the founding of the nation. President Calvin Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act into law that year, extending citizenship to all native people born within the country's borders. Some had already gained that status earlier through the Dawes Act of 1887, which offered citizenship to those who accepted individual land parcels, a move designed more to break up tribal land than to integrate native communities. But even with citizenship on paper, real rights were another matter. Many states continued to block Native Americans from voting for decades afterward. They used tactics like literacy tests, knowing full well that English wasn't the first language of many Native people. Some states simply refused to allow Native voices into the democratic process at all. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, over 40 years later, that those barriers began to come down. The road to full participation in American civic life was long and hard-fought, and for Native Americans, it didn't end with a signature in 1924. 8. The Navajo Nation holds the largest tribal land in America. Out in the rugged Southwest lies a land unlike any other in the United States, nearly 25,000 square miles of high desert and canyon country, stretching across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. It's not a state, but it might as well be. This is the Navajo Nation, the largest native-held territory in the country, about the size of West Virginia, and dwarfing many states by comparison. But size isn't the only mark of its significance. In 2021, the Navajo people also became the most populous native tribe in the country, surpassing the Cherokee. Today, close to 400,000 are enrolled. Even more remarkable, many still speak their traditional tongue, a rarity in our modern world where language and culture so often get swept away. The Navajo language remains the most widely spoken native language in America. It's a land of endurance, not just in miles but in memory, a place where heritage still echoes across the mesas, spoken not just in words, but in the way life is lived. 9. Many tribes don't have their own land today. Land has always been at the heart of native life, but the picture today is a far cry from what it once was. There are 574 tribes officially recognized by the federal government, yet only about 326 tribal land areas across the country. That leaves many native nations without land to call their own. Even among those with land, the size tells another story. On average, their current territory is just a sliver, around 2.6%, of what they held before settlers and government policies forced them off their ancestral grounds. Many tribes were pushed from their homelands and never given a piece of it back. It's often repeated that only 22% of Native Americans live on tribal lands, based on data from the 2010 census. But a more recent 2014 HUD report suggests something different. Nearly 7 in 10 Native people live either on or close to their traditional homelands. The numbers shift depending on how you look, but one thing's clear. Many Native communities remain deeply tied to their land, whether they legally own it or not.